We're going to talk about job costing and the predetermined overhead rates. We talk about what they are and how to calculate them, how they change the cost of the jobs, and how they change profits. Job costing is used when each job has unique requirements, so they differ. So if you're going to do a small consulting job that maybe takes you a week, you're going to have dramatically different materials and labor than a 6-month multi-project assignment. So you can see here under these 4 jobs, they're very different in terms of the materials that they're consuming and how long they take in terms of labor. Very different. But if you're going to be making houses, or you're going to be constructing apartment complexes, or you're going to be making custom yachts or something, each job is going to be very different, depend on the kinds of finishes and the kinds of things the customer wants in their job. So, but what about overhead? Overhead is shared with all the jobs. So what about the insurance for the factory? Or what about the person that goes out and bids on all the jobs? Well, all the jobs share in the benefit of that, but he's not bidding on one particular job, he's bidding on all of the jobs. And so the indirect costs need to be spread to these jobs so that you can price to cover it. What firms have to do is decide what they're going to use as the activity to spread overhead to these jobs. And you try to pick some activity that's related to what's in overhead. Overhead's a great big bag. If you open the bag and look inside there and see overhead, you're going to see all kinds of stuff. You're going to see people on the receiving dock counting things. You're going to be the people cleaning. You're going to be the people that are stocking the cafeteria. You're going to see the utility bills. You're going to see the person scheduling and training and firing. And, there's all kinds of stuff in there. So you do your best to try to find the activity that's most related to what's in that overhead bag. And management decides that. So you'll be watching for that as you are doing assignments in this area. What is the activity base or allocation base or cost driver? Those are 3 different words for the same thing that they're going to use to spread overhead to the jobs. So to spread overhead to the jobs, you need something called the predetermined overhead rate. So that's the decision at the beginning of the year, how we're going to spread these shared costs to the jobs. So you take the estimated overhead and the activity you expect. Estimated activity, sometimes it's called the allocation base or the cost driver. And so you get a rate per activity. And again, management's policy decides whether you're going to use labor hours or pounds of material or machine hours or really anything, forklift hours, whatever it is they're going to use. And so you get a rate. And then as that activity starts happening during the year, the predetermined overhead rate is based on estimate or budget at the beginning of the year. And once you have your rate, you don't need those estimates ever again. You don't use them again. Just use the estimates to get the rate. And then as the year unfolds, you apply that rate to all the jobs. And then later you find out what the actual overhead is and what the actual activity is. And we'll do something with that in a minute. But for right now, we only use the estimate at the beginning of the year to come up with this rate. And this can be done plant-wide. So all the overhead and all the activity, or it can be done by department, in which case you just use that department's overhead and that department's activity, and then you would have a different rate by department. So here we have an example. We have budgeted overhead of $50,000, and they're using direct labor cost. You can also use direct labor hour, but this particular management team used direct labor costs, and they got $125 of overhead for each dollar of direct labor. You can also say that overhead will be 125% of direct labor costs. Both of those are fine to get the same amount. So here, to apply overhead to these 5 jobs, you would now go and see for job 1, what is the direct labor cost and 125% of that. And go and see the direct labor cost in job 2, and overhead will be 125% of that, and so forth. So the 1,200 times 125% and the 7,000 times 125%. Those four numbers added up equal this total applied of 10,675. And we would compare the applied to the actual. There's a real tendency for learners in this area to compare what was applied to the original estimate. Do not do that. Do not do that. We're going to compare what you applied to the actual, and it will give you an over or under, that you either applied a little bit too much or a little bit too little. When you apply too much, you remove the difference between actual and applied and adjust cost of goods sold. If you overapplied, back that little amount off of cost of goods sold. If you underapplied, you add that little underapplied bit to cost of goods sold, right? Notice we're never going to use the estimate again. Once we've got the rate, drop it. We don't use estimates again in job costing. How do I know if it's over and underapplied? Well, you applied 10,675. That was less than actual. That's underapplied. These are journal entries for over and underapplied. So if you're using journal entries in your class, here's your debits and credits for the difference between the 11,000 actual and what was applied to those four jobs. So it didn't apply quite enough. So that 325 would be added to cost of goods sold, and that would clear out the overhead account, which has to be cleared out each period. What if, instead of 11,000, the actual was 10,000? Did we over or underapply? Here we overapplied. We applied 675 more than actual. So we will reduce cost of goods sold by that 675. And there's the journal entry. If you're using debits and credits, you would remove the 675 from overhead. That would clear the overhead account out, and we would reduce cost of goods sold by the over applied. Let me know if you have questions.